Welcome back to Teen TV Deep Dive. Here on this channel, we talk about all things Teen TV. Today, we're going to be talking about the price of being black in suburbia and diving deep into the experiences of black characters in a primarily white TV show. I got inspiration for this episode from the whole wavy trend and Black Girl in Suburbia trend from a SZA song. The line that stuck out the most to me from this song was the price of being black in suburbia, of course. And so today I just wanted to dive deep into the pressures, expectations, and just the unique experience of what being black in suburbia is like through characters in TV. I think before we start going into specific character examples, it's important to take notice to lots of subtopics and just common themes that we see on TV. And one of those, I think, is tokenism. And that's where you're being the only one and just the pressure to represent all Black people. Within Black culture, there are so many different subcultures and groups and interests and aesthetics that Black people as a community have, where if you only have one single Black person to represent such a vast and diverse community, I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect. And a lot of times it feels like the characters themselves aren't real people or written to come across as real people, but rather they're just filled with stereotypes. I think this is harmful for representation and just representing a community because one person can't represent an entire community. I feel like it's just a lot of pressure on the writers as well as the character to come across that way. But I think if writers would zone in and just focus on being respectful and taking some elements of Black culture and the Black community, but also just making the character a well rounded person, I feel like Black representation would come across a lot better on TV. So, first, I wanted to talk about the whole rule book that it could feel like some Black characters have to follow. We see a lot of them navigate things a lot differently from their white counterparts. I feel like the best example of this would be Starr from The Hate You Give. She grew up in a Black neighborhood, but she went to a primarily white school, and her dad constantly reinforced for her that her being sent to a school in a white neighborhood wasn't an opportunity for her to have fun, and it wasn't something that she should waste. So he constantly told her, don't make waves, be respectful to adults, try not to stick out so much. And I feel like with that, Starr didn't really have much of a teenage experience because her parents didn't want her hanging out with the people in her neighborhood because they didn't want her getting caught up in the wrong crowd. But also, they didn't want her to run loose with her peers because she had things to worry about that her peers at school didn't have to, especially with the way of authority figures and disciplinary figures. They viewed Starr in a different way than what they would view, say, her boyfriend or her best friend. And so, with Starr having to navigate things a lot differently, she didn't have the same experiences as her friends in her neighborhood, so she couldn't fully relate to them, as well as she had to kind of hold back a little bit and not get as personal with her friends from school. So she didn't really have anyone who she could just fully be herself around. And it was a very isolating and lonely experience for her, as we've seen in the movie. So for those reasons, I feel like that rule book and having to play is an experience that is unique. Another topic or commonality that we see with these characters on these shows is they had no choice but to be phenomenal. I think the best examples of that I could find was André from Victorious. They all went to a performing arts high school in LA, so of course it was insinuated that they all were a little bit more musically or just artistically inclined than a lot of kids their age. But we see with André, he wrote songs, produced, he sung, danced, all of the things. And he still didn't really get as much recognition as Tori and even Jade did within the show. Yes, Tori was the main character, but Jade also did get a lot of opportunities to show her talents and to kind of progress and have a career past high school in music. Where I feel as though André didn't, and he was just overall a very slept on character, both in his talents that he had, but as well as his relationships that he had throughout the show. André did have girlfriends, but he was never in a relationship or had a thing with people involved in the main cast. We've seen that Jade and Beck had their thing, even Tori and Beck had their thing, but André wasn't ever romantically involved with anyone on the show, even though I felt like there was room for him and Tori to kind of have a friends to lover storyline. It never really happened for him. Another example of this is Mercedes from Glee. She was a vocal powerhouse, and she was also one of the first people to join the Glee Club in season 1. But then in season 3, it was her senior year, and so she felt like she was constantly getting passed by, and more of the opportunities for solos were going to Rachel. And Mercedes kind of reached a boiling point where she was like, my talents aren't being appreciated. This is my senior year too. And she made the decision to leave the Glee Club and start another group where her and the others' talents were way more appreciated there. And everybody got super mad at her. They called her lazy, saying that she didn't want to put in the work to make her way up to the top and all these other things. Yet, when she was sitting in the Glee Club, her talent wasn't being utilized to the best of her abilities. It was perfectly fine. Yet, when she made the choice to stand up and speak her truth, it was a problem, and everyone in the Glee Club felt away. She was a diva, and she was called so many names, and the way that they were throwing shade at her at first just wasn't okay. The whole Mercedes situation definitely reminds me of a more current show, and that's on Love Island USA. I do know that they're in Fiji, and so they're technically not in the suburbs, but within the context of the villa, Olandria and Chelley are one of few Black women that have been in the villa. So I wanted to talk about the whole debacle with Olandria, Chelley, and Huda from the Stand on Business Challenge. I'm not going to rehash the whole situation because this episode will air about the day before the finale. So I feel like that's kind of irrelevant at this point. But the main points that I wanted to get at was that when Huda, Olandria, and Chelley had their conflict with each other, um, I'm not saying that Olandria and Chelley were perfect by any means and that they weren't at fault at some instances within the problem. They were. But I wanted to talk about the backlash that they faced on social media. There were so many nasty comments, people saying that they needed to get out of the villa now, and all of these super hateful, slanderish comments that were made towards them in the blink of an eye was crazy. The switch up was insane. And people were saying, like I said, so many nasty things. Even brands were coming for Olandria and Chelley, all sorts of influencers and all those types of things. But then the next day, they made up though. Huda and Olandria had a conversation, talked it out, and hugged. And then same thing with Huda and Chelley later on that morning. And so a lot of people were saying how they were mean girls and never really liked them. I don't agree with that. I think that a lot of times this is a prime example that just like Mercedes, when Olandria and Chelley were being the therapist of the villa and the shoulder to lean on in moments of weakness and sadness, everything was a-okay. But the minute they were fed up with all of the attitude that Huda had been giving them, it was a problem. Was it a problem, or were Black women not given the same amount of grace and the ability to have a redemption arc like their non-Black counterparts do? Clarke did. And speaking of Clarke, Clarke entered in as a Casa girl. Casa girls never get lots of love on the show. That's just always been the way that things are. People get a lot more attached to the OG girls or just OG Islanders in general. and so they don't really give much love to the Costa girls. But the way that people are trying to paint Clarke and Olandria, even in the way that the show was edited, it made it seem like Olandria and Clarke had a problem, even though they didn't. And I feel like Clarke barely even said two sentences, and people are like, yeah, no, she needs to get out of my village. She needs to get out of my village. Yes, she did kind of hitch her wagon to the wrong person with Taylor. Like, yes, I agree. What he did to Olandria was wrong, and like just the way that he moved about it was very nasty. So yes, that was wrong. But Clarke didn't make him do any of those things. She really wasn't even a part of the problem at all. Yet the hate that she got was insane. So what I'm trying to get to is that being black in suburbia, or just being black in a predominantly white space, is a very unique experience. And through this representation, while some may argue that it's poorly done and how black people do deserve better representation, I do agree with that to an extent. But this is also realistic and truly shows what some people are going through. They feel the pressure to be perfect. They don't feel comfortable to speak their truth. They don't feel comfortable to take up space. And so, what I want the takeaway from today's video is to take these situations that we see on TV and apply them to real life. Give people grace, allow people the room to be themselves, voice their truth, and everyone should be able to have a second chance and get that redemption arc if that's what they please. So yeah, comment down below your thoughts about today's video. I would love to hear them. Be sure to give this video a like and subscribe if you enjoy it, as well as to follow me on my other social medias at Teen TV Deep Dive Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads for more. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.